Shadows from the past. The fall afternoon was alive with vibrant colors as Daniel Rivera parked his car just outside Greendale High, where his daughter, Maya, was a sophomore. He checked his watch, glancing out at the groups of teenagers streaming through the school gates. Daniel had always cherished these moments of picking Maya up from school, sharing the day's end with laughter and stories of her classes, friends, and volleyball practice. As he scanned the crowd for her familiar figure, he caught sight of Maya laughing beside another girl. The sight made him freeze. For a moment, Daniel thought he was seeing double. Both girls shared the same height, the same slight build, even the same lively expressions. Maya had her hair in a loose ponytail, and so did the other girl. They laughed, and as they leaned into each other, mirroring expressions of joy, they looked like reflections. The resemblance was uncanny. Maya spotted him, waved to her friend, and jogged over, her cheeks flushed and her eyes sparkling. "Hey, Dad," she chirped, tossing her backpack into the back seat and sliding into the passenger seat. "Guess what? Everyone at school is convinced I have a twin now." Daniel chuckled, though something in his chest felt tight. "Oh yeah, who's the doppelganger?" "Her name's Emily. She just started here last week," Maya explained, her words tumbling over each other with excitement. "I'm telling you, it's freaky how much we have in common. We're in the same math class, and we both love volleyball. Even Coach did a double take when she saw us together." "That does sound strange," Daniel said, attempting a lighthearted tone. But as Maya continued to talk, he couldn't shake the feeling that this resemblance was more than just a coincidence. "She's into drawing too," Maya continued, pulling out her phone to show him some photos. "Look at this one. We both love to sketch in our notebooks during lunch. She even likes the same kind of art supplies I do." Daniel glanced at the photos, each detail heightening his sense of unease. Not only did Emily look eerily similar to Maya, but the two girls shared so many interests that it seemed impossible for it all to be random. They drove in silence for a while, with Maya occasionally humming along to the radio, oblivious to the growing turmoil in her father's mind. By the time they pulled into their driveway, Daniel's thoughts were racing. A memory stirred from 15 years ago, from a time when his life had been a blur of grief, confusion, and endless hospital hallways. He felt his hands grip the steering wheel a bit too tightly. "Dad." Maya's voice cut into his thoughts, a note of concern in her tone. "Are you okay? You're really quiet." He forced a smile, ruffling her hair gently. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just thinking." As Maya headed inside, Daniel remained in the car for a moment, trying to process his emotions. Part of him wanted to brush it off as a peculiar coincidence, a trick of fate, but a deeper, unsettling instinct told him that there was something more here, something he needed to confront, and that meant meeting Emily himself. Later that week, Maya invited him to her school's annual art showcase. Daniel had been planning to go anyway to support his daughter, but now his interest had an edge of urgency. The evening arrived, and Daniel found himself at the school gymnasium, which had been transformed into a vibrant display of student artwork, complete with spotlights and makeshift walls hung with sketches and paintings. As he stood at the entrance, scanning the crowd for Maya, his heart skipped a beat. There, across the room, was Emily. And from the way she laughed, from the way she brushed a stray strand of hair behind her ear, from the dimple in her left cheek when she smiled, Daniel felt as though he were looking at another version of Maya. Maya's voice broke through his thoughts. "Dad, there she is. Come on, you have to meet her." She grabbed his arm and led him toward Emily, who stood by a detailed pencil sketch of a lone bird soaring through a stormy sky. "Hi, Mr. Rivera," Emily said, extending her hand with a polite smile. "Maya's told me a lot about you." The moment their hands met, Daniel felt a surge of emotions he hadn't expected. The girl's eyes, a rich, warm brown like Maya's, seemed to hold a familiarity he couldn't place. "It's wonderful to meet you, Emily," he said, managing to keep his voice steady. Maya's been talking nonstop about how much you two have in common. Emily laughed, her laugh identical to Maya's. I know, it's so weird, right? Everyone keeps saying we look like twins, and it's kind of fun to play along. As the girls chatted about their favorite art projects, Daniel's gaze drifted to a couple standing nearby. The woman had a protective hand on Emily's shoulder, her expression wary as she watched the girls with an intensity Daniel found unsettling. Her husband stood beside her, his posture formal, his smile practiced. Something about their body language made Daniel's stomach twist. The woman's gaze met his, and for a fleeting second, Daniel saw a flicker of recognition, or was it suspicion, in her eyes. She looked away quickly, whispering something to her husband. Maya nudged him, pulling him back to the present. Dad, isn't Emily's drawing amazing? She has this incredible talent. Yes, he murmured, though his mind was elsewhere. It's very impressive. As the evening wore on, Daniel noticed the couple's behavior more keenly. They seemed to hover close to Emily, guiding her away if she drifted too far or pulling her into conversation whenever they sensed her growing comfortable with Maya. When another parent remarked on how similar Emily and Maya looked, the husband smoothly redirected the conversation to the girls' artwork. When one of the teachers jokingly asked if they were twins, the wife's laughter was tense and forced. Every detail Daniel observed deepened his unease. He'd seen parents like this before, parents who concealed things from their children, parents who clung to an unspoken truth with every move they made. By the time they returned home, Daniel felt the weight of 1,000 unanswered questions pressing down on him. He managed to smile as Maya recounted the evening's highlights, but his mind was already forming a plan. He had to meet Emily's parents, to look them in the eye, and seek out the truth that had haunted him since that hospital room so many years ago. The next morning, Daniel rose early, barely able to sleep with the thoughts racing through his mind. With Maya still fast asleep, he opened an old box he kept in his closet. Inside was a faded photograph of a woman with warm brown eyes and a gentle smile, her hand resting on a rounded belly. Daniel's late wife, Alina, who had passed away unexpectedly during childbirth. Her passing had shattered him, and in the fog of his grief, Daniel remembered the confusion, the hurried explanations, the nurse's apologies that blurred together in a haze. He remembered being told there had been a mix-up in the delivery room, a frantic explanation that only one child had survived. But now, with the image of Emily's face vivid in his mind, Daniel couldn't help but question everything. Could it be that he had been told only half the story? That somewhere in the hospital's records, there was a piece of the truth he had been denied for 15 long years. As the first rays of sunlight broke through the window, Daniel closed his eyes, gripping the photograph tightly. He could feel the weight of Alina's memory, a reminder of everything he had lost, of everything he might yet regain. The truth was out there, waiting to be uncovered. And for Maya's sake, for Alina's memory, and for the mystery that Emily represented, Daniel resolved to find it. A door to the past. The morning light filtered through the kitchen windows as Daniel poured himself a strong cup of coffee. He was usually a patient man, but today he felt a restless urgency, a need to act before his mind could weave its web of doubts. Maya was still asleep upstairs, and the house was filled with the quiet hum of early morning. He took a deep breath, gazing out the window and gripping his coffee mug tightly. As he watched the dew sparkle on the grass, Daniel's mind drifted back to that hospital room 15 years ago, the sterile smell of antiseptic, the hushed whispers of nurses, the flat look in the doctor's eyes as he delivered the crushing news. Alina hadn't survived the birth. And then, the other devastating news that followed. There had only been one baby, his beloved Maya, or so he had been told. He shook himself free of the painful memories and pulled out his phone, calling the hospital where Maya was born. A woman answered with a brisk, professional tone. "Good morning, St. Joseph's Hospital. How may I assist you?" "Good morning," Daniel said, steadying his voice. "My name is Daniel Rivera. I was hoping to inquire about some records related to the birth of my daughter, Maya Rivera, about 15 years ago. There were complications during delivery, and I just have some questions." There was a pause on the line, followed by the sound of typing. "I'm afraid we only hold patient records for 7 years unless specifically requested to retain them longer. But I can put you in touch with the records department. You may be able to find what you need through archived files." A dull frustration settled in his chest, but he thanked her, holding on to the faint hope that he could access some information from that night. After hanging up, he felt a surge of impatience. He couldn't just wait for a call back or risk paperwork delays. No, this needed to be handled personally. That afternoon, with Maya's permission, he drove her to her friend's house so he could head to the hospital on his own. The drive took him through familiar streets that held echoes of his past, memories of weekend drives with Alina, memories that he tucked away but now drifted back, haunting and bittersweet. When he arrived, the hospital's imposing structure loomed above him, its walls the same shade of pale blue he remembered. The memories of that dark day swept over him like a tidal wave, yet he pressed forward, heading straight to the records department, his resolve unshaken. The clerk at the desk, a woman in her 50s with graying hair pulled back in a tight bun, looked up as he approached. "May I help you?" "Yes, I'm looking for records on the birth of my daughter, Maya Rivera. She was born here around 15 years ago, and I was told there was only one child, but He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I've recently come to believe there may have been a mistake." The woman's expression softened, and she gave a sympathetic nod. "That's a long time ago, but if there's anything we have, I'll do my best to help you find it." She tapped her keyboard and searched the archives, her brow furrowing as she scrolled through what looked like a maze of digital files. "Ah, here we are. Maya Rivera, born on August 15th, 2008. Yes, it mentions complications with the delivery." And her face clouded as she skimmed the notes. "What is it?" Daniel leaned forward, his heart pounding. "There's an additional note here," she murmured, adjusting her glasses. "It seems there was initially a record of twins being delivered, but the document was updated the next day with a note. Correction made, only one surviving child. It's unusual, though. The original birth log shows 2 entries." Daniel's heart raced, his suspicions confirmed. "Is there any way to find out who made that correction?" The woman bit her lip, hesitating. "It's unlikely after this much time, but I can look into it. In cases like these, hospitals keep logs of who accesses and modifies records. I'll reach out to our legal team to see what they can release. You'll need to fill out some forms, but we may be able to provide you with a more thorough report." "Thank you," Daniel said, grateful yet frustrated by the bureaucracy. He knew he had to be patient, but he couldn't shake the feeling that time was slipping away. Just as he was about to leave, she stopped him. "Oh, and Mr. Rivera." "Yes." "There was a nurse working on that shift, Linda Watkins. She's still with us, but she works in administration now. I can connect you if you'd like." Daniel felt a flicker of hope. "Yes, please. That would be wonderful." Moments later, he was ushered into a small office lined with file cabinets, where an older woman with short-cropped hair and gentle eyes waited, wearing a look of mild curiosity. She motioned him to a chair, giving him a polite, professional smile. "Mr. Rivera, I'm Linda Watkins. I understand you're asking about your daughter's birth." "Yes," he replied, steadying his voice. "I know it's been years, but I need to understand what happened that night. There was talk of twins, but I was told later there had only been one child. And recently, well, I started to believe there may have been a second child after all." Linda's face grew pale, and her hands tightened around her pen. She cast a glance at the door, making sure they wouldn't be overheard. When she looked back at him, her expression held a mixture of regret and apprehension. "Mr. Rivera," she said softly, her voice trembling, "I've spent years trying to put that night out of my mind, but it was one of the most complicated nights of my career. There were some things I never understood myself, things that seemed wrong. But back then, as a nurse, there wasn't much I could do. What do you mean? Daniel pressed, feeling the tension rise. Linda hesitated, her gaze dropping to her lap. There was a family here, very influential in the community, connected with the hospital board. They had been trying to conceive for years and had just suffered another loss. I can't prove anything, but there were whispers among the staff that this family, desperate for a child, may have taken certain measures to ensure they didn't leave empty-handed. Measures. The word felt like a weight on Daniel's chest. Your wife's complications made things chaotic that night, Linda continued, her voice barely above a whisper. There were twins born, 2 baby girls. But during the shift change, one of the babies was simply gone. I was told by the attending physician that it was a record-keeping error, that only one child had survived. But to this day, I remember seeing both of them. I even held them both in my arms. Daniel felt a chill run through him. And you're saying one of them could have been taken? I don't know for certain, but I remember the family, the Thompsons, Karen and Robert Thompson. They were well known at the time. Robert was set to take a big position in the community, and his wife was devastated after their last loss. Not long after that night, they left the hospital with a baby, and the staff was instructed to keep it quiet. It was highly unusual. Daniel's pulse quickened as the details fell into place. The Thompsons, their last name wasn't the same, but he knew exactly who they were, Emily's parents. Is there any way to prove it? He asked, gripping the edge of his chair. A record, or a DNA sample, anything. Linda shook her head, regret clouding her eyes. The records from that night were heavily edited, and I was warned to keep quiet. But now, hearing your story, Mr. Rivera, if you think your daughter's twin may be with the Thompsons, then you need to speak with them. Thank you, Linda, Daniel whispered, the words barely escaping him. He left the hospital feeling equal parts elated and furious. The pieces were finally falling into place, but the knowledge of what had been stolen from him, 15 years of memories with his daughter, felt like a hollow ache in his chest. That evening, after returning home, Daniel sat in the living room with Maya. He had decided to wait until he had definitive answers before telling her the whole truth, but he knew he couldn't keep her completely in the dark. Maya, he said, keeping his tone as steady as possible, I wanted to talk to you about something. I've been looking into your birth records recently because there's a chance you might have a twin sister. Maya blinked at him, her eyes widening with shock and confusion. A twin sister. Dad, what are you talking about? It's complicated, he said, choosing his words carefully. I don't have all the answers yet, but remember Emily. The girl you said looks just like you. Maya's face paled, and she covered her mouth with her hands. Emily? No way. Dad, are you serious? I'm serious, he said, holding her gaze. I've spoken to people at the hospital, and there are things from that night. Records that were changed. Things I wasn't told. I believe Emily might be your twin sister. Maya's face shifted from shock to a soft glow of realization. That's why we have so much in common, she whispered. That's why it feels like I've known her forever. Daniel reached out, pulling her into a tight embrace. I'm sorry, Maya. I'm sorry for everything that happened, and for what you've missed out on. So, what do we do now? She asked, her voice trembling. Daniel took a deep breath, determination solidifying within him. We'll talk to the Thompsons. If Emily is your sister, they deserve to know what happened. And we all deserve the truth. In the quiet that followed, Daniel felt the weight of the years he'd lost, but also the glimmer of hope for what lay ahead. He had a chance to reunite his family, to bring Maya and her sister together at last. And he would stop at nothing to make it happen. Confrontation and confessions. The morning sun rose slowly, casting a soft light across the kitchen where Daniel and Maya sat, each lost in thought. They had stayed up late discussing the shocking possibility of Emily being Maya's twin sister, struggling to make sense of everything. Despite his cautious approach, Daniel knew he couldn't wait much longer. The truth was a fragile thing, easily shattered by fear or denial, and he had spent too many years without it. As they finished breakfast, Maya reached across the table, her eyes determined. "Dad, I want to be there when you talk to them. If Emily really is my sister, I should be there." Daniel hesitated. He knew this could be painful for her, but he also understood her determination. This was her life, her family, and her right to understand what had happened. "All right," he agreed, squeezing her hand. "We'll go together." That afternoon, they drove to the Thompsons' home, a stately two-story house on a quiet suburban street lined with flowering trees. Daniel's heart pounded as he parked the car, taking a deep breath before they stepped out. Maya was silent, her face set in a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. They approached the door, and Daniel's hand lingered over the doorbell, his mind racing with questions. How would the Thompsons react? What if they denied everything? He steeled himself and pressed the doorbell, feeling Maya's hand tighten around his. The door opened, and Karen Thompson stood there, her expression shifting from polite curiosity to wary recognition as she took in the sight of Daniel and Maya standing on her doorstep. "Mr. Rivera," she said, forcing a tight smile. "And Maya, this is unexpected." "We need to talk, Mrs. Thompson," Daniel said, keeping his tone steady. "It's about Emily and Maya. I believe we have a lot to discuss." Karen's face paled, and she cast a quick glance over her shoulder, her voice wavering. I'm not sure this is a good time. My husband isn't home." Daniel nodded, understanding the underlying message. "I know this is sensitive, but it can't wait. Please, we need answers." Karen's eyes flickered between Daniel and Maya, who looked back at her with an imploring gaze. After a moment's hesitation, Karen stepped aside, gesturing for them to come inside. They entered the spacious living room, tastefully decorated in muted tones, with family portraits lining the walls. Daniel's gaze lingered on a large framed photograph of Emily smiling with Karen and Robert. He couldn't help but feel a pang of jealousy. 15 years of memories he would never have with his own daughter. Karen cleared her throat, her voice tense. "Please sit. I'll get Emily." As she disappeared down the hallway, Daniel and Maya exchanged a glance. Maya's face was pale, her eyes wide with anticipation. They sat in silence, the air thick with tension, until footsteps approached and Karen re-entered the room, followed by Emily, who looked at them with curiosity. "Hey, Maya," Emily said, her smile bright but a little confused. "What's going on?" Maya glanced at her father before speaking. "Emily, this might sound strange, but we came here because we think you might be my twin sister." Emily's face registered surprise, and she looked from Maya to Daniel, then at her mother. Karen's expression was strained, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Emily let out a shaky laugh. "A twin sister," she repeated, looking at her mother. "Mom, is this some kind of joke?" Karen's face crumpled, her composure slipping as she looked down, avoiding her daughter's gaze. Emily's expression faltered as she watched her mother, realization dawning in her eyes. "Mom," she asked, her voice breaking, "please, tell me it's not true." Daniel spoke up, his voice gentle but firm. "Emily, there's something your mother needs to tell you, and we're here because we believe you deserve to know the truth. You and Maya, you were both born on the same day in the same hospital. There were records of twins, but one of the babies was said to have been lost. I believe that baby had died." Emily looked at her mother in shock. "Mom, is he serious? I need you to tell me the truth." Karen's shoulders slumped as she looked up, meeting her daughter's gaze with tear-filled eyes. "Emily, sweetheart, I never wanted you to find out like this. I was going to tell you when you were older, but yes, it's true. You're adopted. The words hung in the air, heavy with years of unspoken truths. Emily's eyes filled with tears as she processed the revelation, her gaze locked on her mother. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "All these years, you let me think you were my real mom." "I am your real mom," Karen said, reaching out to touch Emily's arm. "I raised you. I love you as if you were my own. You are my daughter in every way that matters." "But you lied to me," Emily said, pulling away. Her eyes met Maya's, and for the first time, she seemed to truly see the resemblance, the mirrored expressions and shared features. "And you knew she was my sister." Karen nodded, her face flushed with guilt. "It was a terrible decision, one I've regretted for years. But you were my miracle. I was desperate to be a mother. And the hospital, your father, he had connections. He promised we could give you a life filled with love." Daniel's jaw clenched as he listened to Karen's confession. "You stole 15 years from us. 15 years that Maya and Emily could have spent together as sisters. How could you justify that?" Karen looked away, her face lined with shame. "You have to understand, we thought it was best for everyone. You'd lost your wife, and I couldn't have children. I didn't want to hurt anyone. I wanted a family." Emily sat, her hands trembling as she absorbed the truth. She looked at her mother, hurt flashing across her face. "You had no right," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "No right to decide that for me." The room fell into a strained silence, each person grappling with the enormity of what had been revealed. Daniel felt the weight of the years pressing down on him, but he knew he couldn't let the conversation end like this. "Emily," he said, his voice softening, "I don't want to take anything away from you. Karen and Robert raised you, and that matters. But Maya and we've wondered all these years if there was something more, a piece of our family we were missing. And I want you to know that you're part of our family, too, if you want to be." Emily met his gaze, her face a mixture of confusion and sadness. She turned to Maya, who looked at her with an expression of pure hope. "This is so much," Emily whispered. "I don't know what to think. You're my sister, my real sister." Maya nodded, her voice trembling. "I know it's a lot, and I don't want to make you choose. I've always felt this connection to you, and now it makes sense. I just want you to know that I'm here, no matter what." Karen reached for Emily's hand, her face filled with desperation. "Emily, please, remember that I love you. I know I made a terrible choice, but it was out of love. You're my daughter, and I don't want to lose you." Emily's expression softened slightly, but there was still a hurt in her eyes that couldn't be erased by words. She stood up, her gaze moving between her mother, Daniel, and Maya, as if trying to reconcile the pieces of her life that had suddenly shattered and reassembled in a new, unfamiliar pattern. "I need some time," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is a lot to take in, and I don't know where I stand right now." Maya reached out, gently touching her arm. "That's okay, Emily. Take all the time you need. We're here, whenever you're ready." Emily nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. Without another word, she walked out of the room, heading upstairs to her bedroom, leaving the silence so heavy it felt like the room itself was holding its breath. After she was gone, Karen turned to Daniel, her face etched with remorse. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I know it doesn't make up for anything. But I am. I was desperate, and I let myself believe it was for the best." Daniel looked at her, his expression softened by a strange mix of pity and understanding. "I can't change what happened," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "But I hope, for her sake, that we can find a way to make this right." They left soon after, with Daniel and Maya walking out into the crisp afternoon, leaving Karen standing at the doorway, her face streaked with tears. That evening, back at home, Maya sat beside Daniel in the living room, leaning her head against his shoulder. They didn't speak for a while, each lost in their own thoughts, but the shared silence was comforting. Do you think she'll come around? Maya asked finally, her voice soft. Daniel placed his arm around her, squeezing her shoulder gently. I think she will. This is a lot for her to process, but she's smart. She'll realize that this truth, as painful as it is also a chance for something new. Maya sighed, wiping away a stray tear. I can't believe I have a sister. It's like everything I thought I knew about my life just changed. Daniel nodded, feeling the same weight. I know, but maybe this is our chance to rebuild, to start fresh. I've lost so much time, and I don't know if I'll ever get those years back, but I want to make the most of what we have now. Maya looked up at him, her eyes filled with determination. Then let's give her time, Dad. Let's show her that she has a family that's ready to be there for her whenever she's ready. They sat together, feeling the quiet comfort of shared strength, waiting for the day when Emily would come back to them. And Daniel knew, deep in his heart, that he would never give up on her. The door to the past had been opened, and while the journey ahead was uncertain, he was ready to face it. Bridging two worlds. Emily sat on her bed, hugging her knees, her mind a blur of emotions that refused to settle. Since the confrontation that morning, she hadn't left her room, instead retreating to the solitude of her thoughts. Her gaze drifted to the family photo on her nightstand, the one she'd cherished since she was little. She looked at the familiar faces, at her mother's warm smile, at her father's protective hand on her shoulder. The faces that had once defined her world now felt like strangers. They had kept such a huge secret from her, and she couldn't shake the feeling that her entire life had been a carefully constructed lie. As she sat there, replaying the events over and over, her phone buzzed with a text. It was from Maya. Maya, hey, I know today was a lot. If you need some space, I understand. But I'm here if you want to talk. Emily stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the screen. Part of her wanted to ignore it, to let this whirlwind settle on its own. But a larger part, the part that longed for answers, made her type out a response. Emily. Thanks. I honestly don't know what to say yet. It all feels so unreal. The reply came almost immediately. Maya. It's okay. This is big for me too. But maybe, would you want to hang out? Just us. No pressure or questions, just sisters doing something together. Emily blinked, reading the word sisters over and over, feeling it settle in. It felt foreign yet strangely comforting. After a moment, she typed back, Emily. Okay. I'd like that. They agreed to meet at a small cafe near the high school, a place both had visited countless times with friends, but never together. As she dressed and headed out, Emily told her mom where she was going. Karen gave her a sad smile, her eyes filled with both relief and worry. Take your time, Karen said softly. And remember, I'm here whenever you need me. Emily nodded, managing a small smile before heading out the door. She could feel her mother's eyes following her, heavy with emotions they hadn't yet had the strength to discuss. The cafe was buzzing with the sounds of clinking mugs and quiet conversations when Emily arrived. She spotted Maya at a small table near the window, her face lighting up when she saw Emily walk in. The resemblance between them was uncanny, and even Emily felt a pang of surprise every time she noticed it. Hey, Maya greeted, her smile tentative. Hey, Emily replied, taking the seat across from her. She fidgeted with her cup, avoiding eye contact for a moment. So, how do we start this? Maya gave a small, understanding laugh. I have no idea. I was thinking maybe we could just talk about normal stuff. You know, pretend like we're just friends meeting up. Emily nodded, relieved. Yeah, that sounds good. They spent the next hour talking about everything and nothing, comparing notes on school, hobbies, and favorite places to go in town. Emily was amazed by how many interests they shared. It was as if they had been living parallel lives, always connected in some invisible way. After a while, Maya hesitated, her expression growing more serious. Emily, I know we said no heavy stuff, but I just wanted to say, I get it if you're upset with me or with my dad. I can't even imagine how you're feeling. But I want you to know that none of this was your fault. You didn't ask for any of this." Emily nodded, feeling a lump rise in her throat. "I'm not mad at you, Maya. I don't even think I'm mad at your dad. I'm just confused. I mean, how am I supposed to make sense of a life I didn't even know existed?" Maya looked down, her voice soft. "I know. And I don't want to force you into anything. But I hope, maybe, we can get to know each other better. As sisters." The word sisters felt heavy, but not unwelcome. Emily looked at Maya, seeing a mixture of hope and uncertainty in her eyes. It was a look that mirrored her own feelings, and for the first time, she felt a spark of connection. Despite the pain and betrayal, despite the confusion, there was a bond there, an undeniable thread that tied them together. "Yeah," Emily said, her voice steady. "I think I'd like that." Over the next few weeks, Emily and Maya began to build a tentative friendship. They met up at school, shared lunch together, and even started studying together at the library. Each meeting chipped away at the walls Emily had built around herself, allowing her to see Maya not just as a mirror of herself, but as a person with her own quirks, dreams, and fears. And slowly, she began to feel a warmth she hadn't expected, a sisterly bond that grew stronger with each passing day. One evening, Daniel invited Emily to dinner at their house. She had been reluctant at first, unsure if she was ready to see him again after the revelations about her past. But Maya had been persuasive, assuring her that Daniel only wanted a chance to get to know her, to offer her a place in their lives. When she arrived, Maya greeted her at the door, leading her into the cozy living room where Daniel was waiting. He stood up, his face a mixture of warmth and nervousness. "Emily," he said, his voice gentle, "thank you for coming. I know this isn't easy for you." Emily managed a small smile. "It's okay. I think it's time I got to know you better." Dinner was a blend of small talk and shared stories, with Maya enthusiastically recounting memories from her childhood and occasionally nudging Daniel to share his own tales of their family. Emily found herself laughing, surprised by how comfortable she felt. For the first time, she saw glimpses of what her life could have been like, a life filled with memories she had been denied. But even in the comfort, a quiet sadness lingered, a reminder of everything she had missed. As they finished dessert, Daniel cleared his throat, his expression turning serious. "Emily," he began, "I know you've been through a lot, and I don't want to pressure you. But I want you to know that if you ever need anything, anything at all, I'm here. This house, this family, it's as much yours as it is Maya's." Emily looked down, her emotions churning. "Thank you," she said softly, feeling a warmth settle in her chest. "That means a lot." After dinner, Daniel brought out an old photo album, flipping through the pages as he shared memories of Elena, her mother. Emily listened intently, feeling a strange sense of belonging as he spoke about the woman who had given her life. "She was strong," Daniel said, his voice filled with a quiet pride. "And kind. She would have loved you, Emily. She always wanted a family, and she would have been so happy to see you here." Emily's throat tightened, her emotions threatening to spill over. She felt a deep longing for a woman she had never known, for a life that had slipped through her fingers before she even knew it existed. As she left that night, Maya hugged her tightly, and Daniel gave her a reassuring smile, letting her know she was always welcome. The warmth of their embrace lingered, and as she walked home, Emily felt the first glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to belong in both worlds. However, the next morning, she was jolted back to reality when she found Karen sitting at the kitchen table, her face pale and her eyes red-rimmed. "Emily," Karen said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I've been trying to give you space, but I can't keep quiet anymore. I need to know if I'm losing you." Emily's heart twisted. She looked at her mother, at the woman who had raised her, who had been there through every scraped knee, every birthday, every heartbreak. Karen had made a terrible choice, but she was still the mother who had given her so much love. "Mom," she said, sitting down across from her, "I'm not leaving you. I'm just trying to figure things out." Karen let out a shaky breath, her relief palpable. "I was so afraid," she whispered, taking Emily's hands. "You're my everything, Emily. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I love you. And if I hurt you, I'm sorry." Emily looked at her mother, her own eyes filling with tears. "I know you love me, Mom, and I love you too. But I need to know both parts of my life. I need to understand where I came from. It doesn't mean I love you any less." Karen nodded, her expression a mixture of sorrow and acceptance. "Then I'll support you. I'll be here, no matter what you choose." The days turned into weeks, and Emily began to settle into a rhythm, dividing her time between her two families. She spent weekends with Maya and Daniel, slowly building memories with them, learning about the mother she had never known and the life she had been separated from. And during the week, she returned to Karen and Robert, maintaining the familiar routines that had once defined her world. But as much as she tried to balance both worlds, she knew that something had changed irreversibly. Her life had been split down the middle, and no matter how much she tried to stitch it back together, there would always be a scar. One night, as she lay in bed, her mind drifting between memories of her two families, she received a text from Maya. "Maya, hey, want to come over tomorrow? Dad and I have something we want to show you." Curious, Emily agreed. The next day, she arrived at Daniel's house, where he led her and Maya into the backyard. He held up an old, tattered notebook, its pages filled with sketches and notes. "This belonged to your mother," Daniel said, handing it to her. "She kept this journal while she was pregnant, writing down her hopes, her dreams for the two of you." Emily took the journal, her hands trembling as she opened it. The pages were filled with delicate handwriting, with drawings of baby clothes and nursery plans, with lists of names and hopes for the future. She ran her fingers over the words, feeling a connection to her mother she had never felt before. As she read, tears filled her eyes. Her mother had dreamed of this moment, of watching her daughters grow up together, of seeing them laugh and share secrets as sisters. And while that dream had been stolen from her, Emily knew that she could still honor it, still build the life her mother had wanted for her. When she looked up, Daniel and Maya were watching her, their expressions filled with quiet support. "I want to be a part of this family," she said softly, her voice steady. "I want to build a life with you both." Daniel's face lit up, and Maya threw her arms around her, laughing through her tears. They stood together in the quiet of the backyard, each of them holding a piece of the past, united by a bond that nothing could break. Emily knew that her journey was far from over, that there would be challenges and heartbreak along the way. But as she stood there, surrounded by love, she felt a sense of peace, a sense of belonging that she had never known before. For the first time, she felt truly whole. The weight of the past. Months passed, and Emily's life settled into an uneasy balance. She spent her weekdays at the Thompsons, attending school and keeping up her usual activities, while weekends were dedicated to getting to know Daniel and Maya. This arrangement worked well enough in practice, but emotionally, she felt like she was living in two separate worlds, each with its own rules, expectations, and connections. The truth of her past, once a shocking revelation, had now become a part of her daily life. Yet the scars it left were still raw, and the fractured pieces of her identity sometimes felt too vast to bridge. On a rainy Friday evening, Emily was at Daniel's house, her hair damp from the drizzle outside. She was sitting on the couch with Maya, watching an old movie as Daniel moved about the kitchen preparing dinner. The house felt warm and inviting, and Emily's heart softened as she heard Maya laughing beside her. Moments like these, the quiet, simple ones, made her realize what she had missed growing up, and she was grateful that Daniel and Maya had welcomed her into their lives so openly. Halfway through the movie, there was a knock on the door. Daniel went to answer it, and as he opened the door, Emily's stomach clenched when she heard a familiar voice. It was Karen. Emily exchanged a worried glance with Maya before standing up, her heart pounding. Karen stepped inside, looking out of place in the cozy warmth of Daniel's house, her face pale and tense. "Emily," Karen said, her voice trembling slightly, "I'm sorry to come by unannounced, but I needed to talk to you." Emily looked over at Daniel, who nodded, giving her an encouraging look. "We'll give you two some space," he said, gesturing for Maya to follow him into the kitchen. As they left the room, Karen turned to Emily, her hands wringing together. "I'm sorry to just show up like this," she began, her voice thick with emotion. "I've tried to be supportive of everything, to give you space, but it's been hard." Emily's heart softened, and she motioned for Karen to sit down. "Mom, I know it hasn't been easy, and I know this situation is complicated." Karen sat, her face shadowed with worry. "I feel like I'm losing you, Emily. I don't want you to feel like you have to choose between us, but I need to know if you still want to be part of our family." Emily felt a pang of guilt as she looked into her mother's tear-filled eyes. She could see the fear behind Karen's words, the vulnerability of a mother who was terrified of losing her child. She reached out, taking Karen's hand in hers. "Mom, I'll always be your daughter," she said softly. "Just because I've gotten to know Daniel and Maya doesn't change that. You've raised me, you've been there for me. And that doesn't go away just because I have another family now." Karen let out a sigh of relief, squeezing Emily's hand tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "I know I made mistakes. I know I kept the truth from you, and I'll carry that guilt with me forever. But I hope you know that every decision I made was because I loved you." Emily nodded, her emotions churning. "I know, Mom. I know you did what you thought was best." Karen managed a small smile, her gaze softening. "I can see how happy you are with them. And as hard as it is, I want you to have this. I want you to have a life that makes you feel complete." The tension between them melted, and they sat in silence for a moment, a quiet understanding settling between them. Emily felt a sense of peace wash over her. For the first time, she felt like her two worlds were finally beginning to coexist. As Karen left, Daniel and Maya returned to the living room, and Emily felt a surge of gratitude. She had been afraid that bridging her two families would be impossible, but seeing Karen's acceptance gave her hope that maybe, just maybe, they could all find a way forward together. The following week, however, an unexpected event shattered that fragile sense of peace. At school, Emily and Maya were walking to lunch when they overheard a group of classmates whispering nearby. "Did you hear about Emily and Maya? Apparently, they're long-lost twins or something," one of the girls said, casting a glance in their direction. Emily froze, her heart pounding. She exchanged a glance with Maya, whose expression mirrored her own shock. They had kept the truth private, sharing it only with close friends and family. But somehow, the rumor had spread. Emily felt a wave of panic rise within her. She hadn't been ready for the world to know, for her personal life to become the subject of school gossip. Ignoring the stares, she hurried down the hallway with Maya close behind her, heading for an empty stairwell where they could talk in private. "What are we going to do?" Emily whispered, her voice shaking. "I wasn't ready for everyone to know." Maya placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We don't have to explain anything to anyone," she said, her voice firm. "This is our family, our story. Let them think whatever they want." Emily nodded, feeling a small surge of relief at Maya's support. But even as they tried to brush off the rumors, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life had been thrust under a spotlight she hadn't asked for. She wondered who had spread the story, and why. She wanted her family to be her own, not a topic of gossip. As the days passed, the whispers grew louder, and Emily's unease deepened. One afternoon, as she walked through the hallways, she spotted a girl she didn't know watching her intently. The girl approached, her expression curious. "Hey, Emily, right?" the girl said, her voice tinged with interest. "I heard you're like some long-lost twin. Is that true? Emily felt a flash of anger rise within her. This wasn't a game, wasn't some fascinating story for others to dissect. It was her life, her family. She took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Look," she said, her voice steady. "Whatever you've heard, it's none of your business. Please respect that." The girl looked taken aback, and after a moment, she nodded, walking away with a sheepish expression. But Emily knew this was only the beginning. The truth was out now, and she couldn't control how people would react to it. That night, as she sat with Maya and Daniel at their house, she voiced her concerns. "I don't want everyone at school knowing my life story," she said, frustration evident in her tone. "I didn't ask for this." Daniel placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "I know it's difficult, Emily. But remember, the people who care about you won't judge you. They'll respect your privacy. And as for the rest, they'll lose interest eventually." Maya nodded, her expression supportive. "Yeah, people get bored fast. It might be tough for a while, but we'll get through it together." Emily looked at them, her heart swelling with gratitude. Their support gave her strength, and she knew that as long as she had them, she could face anything. Weeks later, as the initial wave of gossip began to fade, Emily found herself finally able to breathe a little easier. She had grown closer to Maya, and her bond with Daniel had deepened too. They spent their weekends hiking, drawing together, and even cooking elaborate meals in Daniel's kitchen, laughing as they navigated recipes that never quite turned out as expected. Emily felt a sense of belonging she had never known, a warmth that had once seemed out of reach. One Saturday afternoon, as they sat together in the living room, Daniel cleared his throat, his expression thoughtful. "Emily, there's something I've been wanting to share with you," he said, reaching for an envelope on the coffee table. "It's something I've kept all these years. I think it's time you have it." Curious, Emily took the envelope from him, carefully opening it. Inside was a small, faded photograph of a woman with kind eyes and a soft smile, her hand resting on her belly. Emily's heart skipped a beat as she realized she was looking at her biological mother, Elena. "She was so excited for you and Maya," Daniel said, his voice filled with emotion. "She kept that photo by her bedside every day of her pregnancy. She had so many dreams for both of you." Emily stared at the photo, a lump forming in her throat. For years, she had wondered about her birth mother, wondered if she would ever know her face, her voice, her touch. And now, here was a piece of her, a fragment of the love that had brought her into this world. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. She felt Maya's hand slip into hers, grounding her, offering her silent support. Later that evening, as she lay in bed with the photograph beside her, Emily felt a deep sense of peace settle within her. For the first time, she felt as if she belonged fully to both families, to the mother who had raised her and the mother who had brought her into this world. She understood that she didn't have to choose between them. She could carry both in her heart, honoring their love in her own way. And as she drifted off to sleep, she knew that while the journey had been painful, it had led her to a place of healing and acceptance. She was no longer a fractured soul, split between two worlds. She was Emily, a daughter, a sister, a young woman with a family who loved her. No longer bound by the shadows of the past, she was ready to embrace the future, knowing that she was finally, irrevocably whole. Maya placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We don't have to explain anything to anyone," she said, her voice firm. "This is our family, our story. Let them think whatever they want." Emily nodded, feeling a small surge of relief at Maya's support. But even as they tried to brush off the rumors, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life had been thrust under a spotlight she hadn't asked for. She wondered who had spread the story, and why. She wanted her family to be her own, not a topic of gossip. As the days passed, the whispers grew louder, and Emily's unease deepened. One afternoon, as she walked through the hallways, she spotted a girl she didn't know watching her intently. The girl approached, her expression curious. "Hey, Emily, right?" the girl said, her voice tinged with interest. "I heard you're like some long-lost twin. Is that true? Emily felt a flash of anger rise within her. This wasn't a game, wasn't some fascinating story for others to dissect. It was her life, her family. She took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Look," she said, her voice steady. "Whatever you've heard, it's none of your business. Please respect that." The girl looked taken aback, and after a moment, she nodded, walking away with a sheepish expression. But Emily knew this was only the beginning. The truth was out now, and she couldn't control how people would react to it. That night, as she sat with Maya and Daniel at their house, she voiced her concerns. "I don't want everyone at school knowing my life story," she said, frustration evident in her tone. "I didn't ask for this." Daniel placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "I know it's difficult, Emily, but remember, the people who care about you won't judge you. They'll respect your privacy. And as for the rest, they'll lose interest eventually." Maya nodded, her expression supportive. "Yeah, people get bored fast. It might be tough for a while, but we'll get through it together." Emily looked at them, her heart swelling with gratitude. Their support gave her strength, and she knew that as long as she had them, she could face anything. Weeks later, as the initial wave of gossip began to fade, Emily found herself finally able to breathe a little easier. She had grown closer to Maya, and her bond with Daniel had deepened too. They spent their weekends hiking, drawing together, and even cooking elaborate meals in Daniel's kitchen, laughing as they navigated recipes that never quite turned out as expected. Emily felt a sense of belonging she had never known, a warmth that had once seemed out of reach. One Saturday afternoon, as they sat together in the living room, Daniel cleared his throat, his expression thoughtful. "Emily, there's something I've been wanting to share with you," he said, reaching for an envelope on the coffee table. "It's something I've kept all these years. I think it's time you have it." Curious, Emily took the envelope from him, carefully opening it. Inside was a small, faded photograph of a woman with kind eyes and a soft smile, her hand resting on her belly. Emily's heart skipped a beat as she realized she was looking at her biological mother, Elena. "She was so excited for you and Maya," Daniel said, his voice filled with emotion. "She kept that photo by her bedside every day of her pregnancy. She had so many dreams for both of you." Emily stared at the photo, a lump forming in her throat. For years, she had wondered about her birth mother, wondered if she would ever know her face, her voice, her touch. And now, here was a piece of her, a fragment of the love that had brought her into this world. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. She felt Maya's hand slip into hers, grounding her, offering her silent support. Later that evening, as she lay in bed with the photograph beside her, Emily felt a deep sense of peace settle within her. For the first time, she felt as if she belonged fully to both families, to the mother who had raised her and the mother who had brought her into this world. She understood that she didn't have to choose between them. She could carry both in her heart, honoring their love in her own way. And as she drifted off to sleep, she knew that while the journey had been painful, it had led her to a place of healing and acceptance. She was no longer a fractured soul, split between two worlds. She was Emily, a daughter, a sister, a young woman with a family who loved her. No longer bound by the shadows of the past, she was ready to embrace the future, knowing that she was finally, irrevocably whole. A new beginning. The air was thick with the scent of pine and wildflowers as Emily and Maya made their way up the wooded trail with Daniel and Karen following closely behind. It was a crisp Saturday morning, and the four of them had decided to meet for a family hike, an attempt to bridge their two worlds in a place that felt neutral, comforting. The sun peeked through the trees, casting dappled shadows along the trail, and Emily felt a sense of calm she hadn't experienced in months. She glanced over at Maya, who was chatting animatedly about a school project, her eyes bright and her smile contagious. In the weeks since the truth about their past had come to light, they had become inseparable, sharing secrets, fears, and dreams in a way only sisters could. Emily felt as if she had known Maya her entire life, and that missing piece of herself had finally fallen into place. Behind them, Daniel and Karen walked in silence, each absorbed in their own thoughts. It was their first time together since the emotional confrontation, and Emily could sense the lingering tension between them. She knew they had both come for her and Maya, putting aside their differences for the sake of their daughters. When they reached a clearing at the top of the hill, they settled onto a fallen log, admiring the sweeping view of the valley below. Emily took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything they had endured to reach this point. "This is beautiful," she murmured, looking out over the landscape. She glanced at her parents and sister, her heart swelling with gratitude. For the first time, she felt like they were all moving forward together, even if the path hadn't been easy. Karen smiled, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from Emily's face. "I'm glad we did this," she said softly. "Being here with all of you, it feels healing." Daniel nodded, his gaze steady as he looked at Karen. "We've all been through so much," he said, his voice thoughtful. "But I think this is where we can start fresh, where we can begin to let go of the pain and find peace." Karen's eyes glistened, and she looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and regret. "Thank you, Daniel. I know I can never change the choices I made, but seeing you and Emily together, it reminds me of the love that started all of this. I only wanted to be a mother, to give her everything I could." Daniel gave a small nod, his expression softening. "And you did. I see how much you love her, and I'm grateful for that. I don't think we need to dwell on what we lost anymore. We're all here now, and that's what matters." They shared a quiet smile, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Emily watched, feeling a sense of relief and joy blossom within her. Her parents had found a way to accept each other, to see past the hurt and find common ground. It was a step toward the healing she had dreamed of, and she knew it meant the world to both her and Maya. As the months continued to pass, Emily settled into her new reality with a growing sense of confidence and purpose. She spent weekdays with the Thompsons, attending school and continuing with her hobbies, and weekends with Daniel and Maya, strengthening her bond with her sister and building memories with her father. Her life, once fractured and uncertain, had found a new balance. She was no longer torn between two worlds, but instead felt like she belonged to both. One weekend, as Emily and Maya were sitting at the kitchen table working on their art projects, Daniel walked in with an excited smile. "Girls, I have some news," he announced, holding up 2 envelopes. "These came in the mail today." Emily and Maya exchanged curious glances as he handed each of them an envelope with the name of a local art gallery printed on it. They tore open the envelopes, their eyes widening as they read the contents. "Dad," Maya exclaimed, looking up with a beaming smile, "we got accepted into the gallery showcase." Daniel grinned, his eyes shining with pride. "I knew they'd love your work. You both deserve this." Emily stared at the letter, her heart pounding with excitement. Art had always been her way of expressing herself, of processing her emotions, and now she would have the chance to share it with the world. She looked at Maya, her excitement mirrored in her sister's eyes. "This is amazing," Emily whispered, feeling tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "I can't believe we're actually doing this together." Maya reached over, taking her hand with a warm smile. "We make a pretty good team, don't we?" They spent the following weeks preparing for the showcase, working on their pieces side by side, sharing tips and encouraging each other. For Emily, it was more than just an art show. It was a symbol of the journey she had taken, the painful and beautiful steps she had walked to arrive at a place of peace. When the night of the showcase arrived, the gallery buzzed with the quiet hum of conversation, filled with people admiring the artwork lining the walls. Emily and Maya stood together, watching as guests stopped to admire their pieces. Each painting was a reflection of their experiences, of the pain, healing, and love that had shaped their journey. Daniel and Karen stood nearby, their faces filled with pride. They had come together to support their daughters, to celebrate the family they had created despite the odds. As the evening wore on, Emily noticed a familiar face approaching, a girl from school who had once been one of the many to gossip about her story. The girl paused, her gaze lingering on one of Emily's paintings before looking over at her with a hesitant smile. "Emily," she said softly, "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I didn't understand everything you were going through, but now, seeing your art, I feel like I do. You're really brave." Emily felt a rush of gratitude, her initial resentment melting away. "Thank you," she replied, her voice sincere. "It wasn't easy, but I wouldn't change any of it. I learned a lot about myself, and I'm grateful for the family I have." The girl smiled, nodding before moving on to admire the other paintings. Emily watched her go, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. She had come full circle, from the pain of feeling exposed to the pride of standing strong in her truth. After the gallery closed that night, the four of them, Emily, Maya, Daniel, and Karen, went out for a late dinner to celebrate. They laughed and shared stories, reminiscing about the past and dreaming about the future. There was no longer any tension, only a sense of unity that felt unbreakable. As they sat together, Daniel raised his glass, his voice filled with warmth. "To family," he said, looking at each of them in turn. "To love, and to the journey that brought us here." They clinked glasses, each of them smiling, their eyes shining with unshed tears. For Emily, it was a moment she would carry with her forever, a moment of healing, of belonging, of joy. The months that followed were filled with new beginnings. Emily found a renewed sense of purpose in her art, creating pieces that reflected her journey and the strength she had found. She and Maya continued to grow closer, their bond deepening with each shared laugh, each whispered secret, each quiet moment of support. Karen and Daniel remained close as well, united in their love for their daughters. They found a way to bridge their differences, to honor the family they had built despite the painful past. Together, they formed a family that was unconventional, but bound by a love that was stronger than any obstacle. One crisp autumn afternoon, Emily, Maya, Daniel, and Karen gathered in a small park near their neighborhood. They had brought a blanket, a picnic basket, and a small collection of family photos. They spent the afternoon reminiscing, sharing stories, and reflecting on the journey they had taken to get here. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the park, Daniel handed Emily a small wrapped box. Surprised, she looked at him, her eyes questioning. "Open it," he said, his voice gentle. Emily unwrapped the box, revealing the delicate silver locket. She opened it, finding two tiny photographs inside, one of herself and one of Maya, taken during their childhoods. Her heart swelled with emotion as she looked at the images, the symbol of their bond. "Now you can carry both your families with you," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. Emily felt tears streaming down her cheeks as she looked at the locket, feeling the weight of everything it represented. She looked up at her parents and sister, her heart overflowing with gratitude and love. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Thank you for giving me this, for giving me all of you." They embraced, each of them feeling the strength of the love that bound them together, a love that had overcome lies, pain, and years of separation. It was a love that had survived the hardest trials, a love that would carry them into the future. As they stood together in the fading light, Emily felt a sense of peace settle over her. She was no longer lost, no longer divided. She had a family, two families, who loved her, who had fought for her, and who had shown her the power of forgiveness and healing. She was Emily, a daughter, a sister, a young woman with a heart full of love, ready to embrace the future. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the park, she knew that this was just the beginning of a beautiful new journey.